West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
And down in Washington, Special Counsel Jack Smith also is pushing for a gag order on Trump. I mentioned that even though these are completely separate cases, how they work, the rulings, the resolution are completely separate jurisdictions. One is the state system in civil, the other is the federal system in criminal. But if you've heard about gag orders and are wondering, okay, why so many gag orders? Well, what all these cases have in common, and sometimes the news is simple, sometimes the truth is simple. What all these cases have in common in this instance is the defendant. And the civil defendant who was just gagged in New York today also faces calls to gag him in the federal case, where Jack Smith is arguing that a targeted, what we would call a partial gag order, is necessary to protect witnesses and other people in that case. So we are still awaiting a decision in that case where that issue went all the way up to the D.C. Court of Appeals. Now, things are not looking very promising for Donald Trump there for a variety of reasons. In the special counsel case, moving beyond the gag orders to the trial he actually faces in March, well, there are outlets reporting one of Trump's lawyers testified to the special counsel. She told him that it would be a crime to resist complying with the subpoena for the Mar-a-Lago documents. Jack Smith overseeing both Trump federal cases. That's the documents espionage case and the coup case that we've been talking about more recently, and that is, of course, scheduled for an earlier trial. Now, NBC News has not confirmed the reports you see on your screen from the Times and ABC there, but they are damning the lawyer reportedly telling Trump very clearly it's going to be a crime if Trump refuses to comply, and that Trump, quote, absolutely understood the warning. There was also the advice of counsel. You may have heard that term. Quote, you've got to comply. Now, when we show you this quote and this type of evidence, the reason this is bad for Trump is that sometimes you can argue that you were confused, or that you were so confused that you didn't have the level of criminal intent required to prove that you should go to jail for a crime, for breaking the law. We have our experts on, our lawyers on, and others who talk about those elements. Sometimes people say, gosh, Ari, seems frustrating. Why is it so hard to prove? Why does it take so long, etc.? Well, the reason is this ain't a parking ticket. In the United States, when the rules are enforced correctly, the defendants not only have rights, but they have all of the benefits of the burden being on the government. The government has to prove not only that you did it, but that you intended to do it, that you meant to do it, that it wasn't just some mistake or blunder or even car accident. A car accident where people die is a tragedy, but it's not a murder unless the government can prove that you set out to use your car to take a life. And misplaced documents aren't usually always convicted as espionage-related crimes unless you really set out to do that. And so that evidence is really bad for Trump if a jury's going to hear that not only did he do it, because there's literally no factual debate about the documents. They found them. You've seen them on TV. But not only did he mean to do it, but he was warned doing it would be a crime, and he went forward anyway. That adds the evidence of criminal intent. As for the advice of counsel defense, that's the related issue where maybe you are able to find some lawyer or some memo where you say, I thought I was doing what they wanted. I was trying to follow the rules. Well, there's someone who knows a lot about that type of defense and how Donald Trump may allegedly misuse it. Take a listen.
Donald cares for no one or anything other than himself. He will now start blaming things on the lawyers. Well, the lawyers told me to do it. Quite frankly, the lawyers told me. I'm not a lawyer. That's what I hired them for. And he's going to throw them under the bus, and they know it, and that's why they're all out there protecting themselves.
Michael Cohen there speaking to our colleague Katie Fang on MSNBC on this program, and he's referring to something he lived through. He even did a bid partially for convicted crimes on behalf of Trump, partially for other things that basically he pled out to for his own behalf. But altogether, he's talking about what Trump does as a client. There are also new details about the coup efforts, because we've talked about all the different ways you get evidence. Liz Cheney's book's made waves, Jan 6 committee, but then you have all of these other ways that some of this evidence has been held. And so texts from Republican Congressman Scott Perry have now become public, revealing that he had this vast web of contacts that he was talking to, these different contacts, where they were discussing how they might overturn or steal the election. And it included really a who's who of the Republican Party. People like Ronna McDaniel, Mark Meadows, some of these names you recognize, White House counsel's office, the director of national intelligence, that's a pretty serious position with security clearances and national security powers, the Trump campaign lawyers, and this is an interesting one you see on the upper middle right there, Trump official Jeffrey Clark. Well, that name is familiar because it ties a link from the Justice Department to the Republican Congress to Donald Trump's alleged conspiracy, because Mr. Clark is an unindicted co-conspirator in Jack Smith's coup case. And when we take this all together, we've shown you some of these individuals have already pled out. They are guilty. They are convicts. And we can show you here on the screen. You'll look at, basically, you have some from the Washington case and the Georgia case. And you see Clark in the lower right, a co-conspirator in the DOJ case, now tied to this Republican congressman. At the time, nobody knew in public. There wasn't even a single article about that level of advanced plotting. Mr. Clark, as you can see in the yellow lower right, has been indicted in Georgia for that stuff. Legally, he's presumed innocent, but there's a ton of evidence that prosecutors say means they can convict him. And if you scan your eyes over, you'll see people like Miss Ellis, who was already convicted in Georgia and who's pledged to cooperate with prosecutors. So all of this together shows that rising heat. And now take a look at how some of this fits in.
Was it your understanding that Representative Perry was pushing for a specific person to take over the department?
He wanted Mr. Jeff Clark to take over the Department of Justice.
He said something to the effect of, I think Jeff Clark is great, and I think he's the kind of guy who could get in there and do something about this stuff.
The kind of guy who could do something about this stuff has to be translated to one of the few people working inside the Justice Department who would actually partner up with the outgoing losing candidate, Donald Trump, to try to overthrow President-elect Biden. That's what Jeffrey Clark was. And look, I've said this before, Donald Trump's not running for a second term, he's running for a life term. These are the type of people, some of whom are indicted, some of whom are convicted, that would come into power in a second term. This is exactly what he wanted to do when he thought he was losing power. He's going to continue, and he said in public, he's going to use the DOJ. He said it in the last week or two. We're not running every soundbite of everything Donald Trump says as a candidate, but this is all going to be public for people to consider as they cast their votes next year. These are the people he wants in charge. He's publicly identified the DOJ as the place he wants to do it, to punitively, potentially illegally, go after his critics, opponents, enemies. It's a playbook from other countries, but it's also a playbook from Donald Trump's failed coup. Now, Clark went through Perry to try to get access to more sensitive intelligence about election results than he had access to as a DOJ official, telling Perry, quote, tell the president, the CIA chief, quote, needs to get me these security clearance tickets. Perry replies, referring to then outgoing President Trump, POTUS is giving you a presidential security clearance. So you got to ask yourself, as we learn more and more and more about this, why do you need all these cutouts and intermediaries? Why would someone in the executive branch, Mr. Clark, who, as I mentioned, is now indicted in state court and an unindicted co-conspirator by the DOJ where he once worked, why does he need to go to a different branch, the legislative branch, to then connect back up to the person who, for a few days at least left, was still the head of the executive branch, Donald Trump. It's not normal, it's secretive, it's suspicious, and while the answer is complicated, it may shed light on why so many people are worried about going to jail for this coup. Would it be the normal process to go from executive to Congress to back to executive to get emergency security clearance like this? And if not, what might that tell you with an investigative lens as you look at all of this?
Well, of course, it's not at all commonplace, and it's also not commonplace to be doing this with respect to somebody who was in the civil division, and prior to that was the head of the environmental division. It had nothing to do with the Department of Justice looking at potential voter fraud. That's not his purview. As has been very, very clear. So this is really because they wanted Jeff Clark to issue a letter that was false on the part of the Department of Justice, saying they were looking at fraud allegations. And in fact, the DC indictment refers to Jeff Clark going further than that and drafting a memo that's saying that he actually found indications of fraud. It reminds me very much of what the former president did with Zelensky. He wanted a foreign country to say that they were investigating his political rival. So to me, it's exactly of a piece, which is using a trumped up claim of prosecutor looking into wrongdoing to say, see, there's wrongdoing there with respect to either the election or to a political adversary. But to me, it also goes to the idea that we now have not just information from Senator Grassley being complicit. We now have information, as you referred to, with respect to Senator Perry being complicit. And these are the key people who enable what Donald Trump is doing. And it's sort of shocking that they're sitting members of Congress.
Yeah, as you say, part of the one branch that's supposed to be the most concerned, at least as the founders saw it, with direct democracy, and yet there they are undermining it, and that's the sort of one of the points that lets you know we're in the breach. As you know, Andrew, a lot of legal issues are complicated, some are not. I don't know if you'll agree with, and it's fine if you don't, my legal reporting that the only thing connecting the gag orders in New York and DC is the defendant. Otherwise, they're quite different cases and they'll go different ways. But what does that tell you, and what do you see in the even more significant question of whether Jack Smith will win the partial gag order he wants against Trump going into March?
Well, they are different, other than the defendant, obviously. It's notable, the one in New York, it's a civil case, and it is the mildest of gag orders. It literally was, do not denigrate and cause potential harm for the staff of the court. I mean, you shouldn't even have to be told that. It's so obvious that is a rule. I also think with respect to a criminal case, I know this sounds like I'm a real pedant, and that's probably true, but I don't really think of it as a gag order. I think of it as a restriction that's part of his bail conditions. He's a defendant out on bail, pending trial. And it is true that it does gag what he can say. But you know what else is restricted? His Second Amendment rights.
It is Friday, the 1st of December of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Oh my. Now, be assured it's not only a liquid diet, which is the French 77 here is the cocktail of choice, by the way. We do have some edible repast as well, because, well, that's what we do. Anyway, how are you? We've made it to the end of the week, and what is a weekend anymore? Remember when we had weekends before Trump came on the scene? I mean, days of rest. Don't have them anymore. Eek. Okay, well, the chaos continues. It looks like the Republicans are closing ranks around George Santos. And we know why. Because when he's expelled, his seat is going to be filled by a Democrat, and we all know that. And so do they. So even though they know that this guy is an inveterate criminal, they basically are saying, well, how is he different than the rest of us? It's true. How is he? So I guess they're going to keep old George, and at the same time, just to show that they are the party of law and order, meaning they make up the laws and you better follow their orders or else. They are going to continue with this impeachment charade of Joe Biden. Okay. Because apparently you can't subpoena private citizens unless their last name is Biden. Oh, yeah. Leonard Leo. Nope. Not going to get him coming. What is he going to do? Will they finally send U.S. Marshals and arrest these mofos? I wish they would. And while they're at it, couldn't they just pick up Steve Bannon on the way and throw his ass in jail? Why does he get to pontificate endlessly and foment this insurrection? I don't know if it's foment because it's ongoing, but foment the continuous insurrection. Isn't this guy supposed to be like under a criminal indictment with that Chinese billionaire for any number of things? Or are they at odds with each other now? I can't remember. But regardless, oh, that's right. I forgot. The godly powers of Trump pardoned this insurrectionist. And we're all supposed to sit around and go, oh, yeah, that's normal. We don't have any guardrails against that. We don't. Boy. So they're going to impeach Joe Biden. For what? Because Donald Trump said so. And trust me, they're not going to stop at one impeachment. They're going to get two. And I'm probably going to say 4 because Donnie gets twice of everything his way. Donnie 2 scoops. Everybody else gets 1 scoop. Donnie gets 2. Donnie was impeached 2 times. Joe Biden has to be impeached 4. Trust me. We will see an attempt at exactly that. And we're all supposed to sit around and go, oh, well, we don't have any guardrails against that. We don't have any constitutional restrictions upon that. Give me a break. How about we have criminal statutes that are there to arrest criminals, even those who committed an insurgency against the United States of America? An insurrection, a coup that is ongoing. It's an insurgency. When the electeds get involved, I'm looking at you, Scott Perry. I'm looking at you, Lindsay. Okay. And I love their scorched earth policy getting back to Leonard Leo and who else are they? All of a sudden, I'm having a brain lock. I apologize. I've been getting these without all my caffeine requirements in the morning. Their scorched earth policy about you can't bring in this guy. Oh, Harlan Crow. You can't bring in these great Americans. They're Nazis. As far as I'm concerned, they're using the goodwill and our own laws against us, just like the Nazis did. Pack the courts with incompetent sycophants. Talk about grooming. My God. Can't have universities because, they might be able to see through the agitprop. Exactly. So, we have a corrupt court. And it's curious that the corruption seems to be concentrated upon one party. Why is that? Because once again, fascism and criminality go hand in hand. Corruption of business and fascism go hand in hand. Okay, no wonder they were going ape shit about Antifa. Anti-fascism. I mean, the fascists were all up in arms. We got to stop this Antifa. Why would anybody want to stop Antifa? Because they're fascist. I'm not a fascist. Well, you're a fascist at heart if you think Antifa is the problem. So it was curious to watch Lindsay and the others just go, as I use the professional term is ape shit. They were going ape shit. Meaning that they are beating their chests and throwing their poop all over everything and everyone. It will be the end of America. That's a threat. That's not a warning. That is a threat. Because we are going after the big money guys, and they should have never been involved in our government, what one whit. There should not be a campaign structure in which media gets paid billions of dollars to run political ads. They should be run for free. And if you're worried about production costs, get the poster board and the big old magic markers. Make a sign. Put the camera in front of the sign. Good to go. Vote for Joe. Or vote for Kamala. A vote for Joe is a vote for Kamala. A vote for Kamala is a vote for Joe. Put that on a sign. Good to go. Trump signs will probably read, we'll try to put his voluminous Truth Social posts up. Yep. Losers and vermin. That just reminds me, there was a study about how the media, how many times they reported on the term deplorable, and how many times they reported on Trump using the Hitlerian jargon of vermin and other pejoratives. I have to say, though, that it's kind of nice that we're getting liberal back. I mean, it used to be a pejorative. It was like a terrible thing to be liberal. That's why we started calling ourselves progressives. And we call ourselves progressives here at Netroots Radio, Progressive Radio. And but it's nice to be able to get the term liberal back without feeling, oh, wow, there's something wrong with being a liberal. Now there's something wrong with being a progressive. Okay, well, we all got used to calling ourselves progressives, and so that's what they're going to go after. And unfortunately, there's a few extremists in the midst of that once again, sort of supplants the idea of what progressivism is. When these Nazis talk about Antifa, they're talking about black bloc. They see, black. There's something about the color black that, first of all, that really agitates them. But when people are like garbed in black and covering their faces, it's just scary. And I keep telling them Antifa is not black bloc. Black bloc is, at best, anarchists, and more than likely, place where violent actors can embed themselves and cause mayhem, and then they can blame it on Antifa. Jesus Christ. I mean, the Boogaloo Boys would infiltrate Black Bloc and then start beating up cops. Killing them. Antifa. I love the fact that the violence and the mayhem that the Republicans talk about, Black Lives Matter, the riots of they destroyed our cities. Well, that's not even close to being true. And it wasn't Black Lives Matter that started these riots. Let's be clear. Proud Boys, Boogaloo, whatever, and cops. And, people who agree with all of that stuff. I mean, even the Umbrella Man. When that happened, in real time, people were questioning what this guy's like. He's an agent provocateur, starting a fire at this auto parts store, and that got proved out to be correct. So yep, there's some dark forces at work, and it ain't for the benefit of representative democracy. Good Americans, indeed, like the good Germans. I'm not a Nazi. I was never. Every single German Nazi that gets caught say they were never a member of the party. How is that possible? Jeez. Okay, enough of that. It's Friday. We should get on with the curated part of the show, since we do take time to put it together, so we might as well put some time to it, won't we? We will. Okay, well, we spoke about Scott Perry, and the January 6th committee had some stuff on him, but the DOJ has a lot more, so I know that they're afraid of going after electeds, but you go after electeds all the time for any number of corruptions, bribery, or whatever. Get this guy and his compatriots, conspirators, all the way to the top, and you know who I'm talking about. On the rest of the menu, the Oregon Secretary of State says she lacks the authority to bar Trump from the Republican primary ballot. Okay. So much for the Constitution of the United States that prevents people who took part in an insurrection to overthrow the United States. They get to run again so they can do it again. Wow. That's what makes America great? Yikes. Securities fraudster, and he also happens to be the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, announced he is suing Pfizer for emotionally blackmailing the American public into getting the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, I want to see discovery with this guy. Oh, that's right. We're not going to get any discovery on him because he's the AG. We'll see how far that goes. And most cities will replace harmful lead pipes within 10 years under a new Biden administration plan. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog told the COP28 that the world wants more nuke energy as a means to fight climate change. Yeah, well, getting a revival of that. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov walked out on Western critics while attending international security talks in northern Macedonia. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left is our link to our Patreon page, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us deflect the ever-increasing costs of bills and costs of running this powerhouse of resistance. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended. Now, if you could afford to send us what you might spend on, I don't know, how about an espresso-type coffee drink? If you could afford to send us those funds once a month, it really does help us deflect the bills and ever-increasing costs. And thank you once again for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Facebook, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those, except Kelly takes care of the Facebook page, so there. Follow me on all those social media platforms, plus more. You can find me most anywhere at Justice Putnam, or a variation thereof, like drop the at. Anyway, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, so folks have an opportunity to read the actual reportage from the actual reporters in the effort of providing transparency, I suppose. Indeed it is. Anyway, do check out the show notes and links diary, and then you can read the actual articles, because sometimes we abbreviate and sometimes we add. Follow the show on Twitter. It's just a placemat, I know. Placeholder. I don't know why I keep saying placemat. Walk all over it. Anyway, follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. Pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker. Tune in, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found. Just not going to find them. You know where. Not going to find them on Stitcher. Okay, just can't. It's impossible. I don't need to tell you why. Because I've told you so many times. Alrighty. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe on this fabulous Blue Moon Spirits Fridays is out of Oregon Public Broadcasting by Oregon Public Broadcasting staff. Oregon Secretary of State says she will not remove Donald Trump from the May 2024 presidential primary ballot, rejecting a push from a group that argues he should be barred from serving again because of his role in spurring the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The advocacy group Free Speech for People is pushing election officials across the country to keep Trump off 2024 ballots. They cite Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was passed after the Civil War, as a way to stop former Confederates from seeking public office. Apparently, it doesn't prevent current Confederates. Okay? Just saying. On Thursday, yesterday, Secretary of State LaVon Griffin-Vilade said she lacks the authority to block Trump from the primary ballot. State election staff who work for Griffin-Vilade do have the power to vet the qualifications of people who want to appear on most primary ballots to hold state office. Election regulators used that power in 2022 to bar New York Times journalist Nicholas Kristof from the Democratic primary for governor, ruling that he could not establish Oregon residency at the time, even though he was born there, and the family home still existed, even though he was been working in New York for some time. But the Attorney General's office told Griffin-Vilade that presidential primaries are different. Oregon voters who return their ballots in the GOP primary next May will not be selecting the next president. Unique among Oregon elections, they do not determine who is elected to office or even who will appear on the general election ballot. Rather, they effectively serve as a straw poll of party members to determine their preferred candidates and to guide the delegates to the party's national convention, wrote Benjamin Gutman, Oregon Solicitor General. Whether Section 3 bars former President Trump from returning to office is a question of paramount importance to American democracy, Gutman wrote, but it is not a question that the legislature has charged the Secretary with determining when assembling a list of candidates at the primary election stage. Gutman recommended Griffin-Volade put off any decision about whether Trump qualifies for the general election ballot in Oregon, given that legal debates are underway in multiple states over whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to his campaign. Griffin-Volade noted that her decision applies only to the primary. A.J. McDougall of the Daily Beast brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Texas Attorney General and securities fraudster Ken Paxton announced yesterday, Thursday, that he is suing Pfizer, accusing the drug maker of emotionally blackmailing the American public into getting the COVID-19 vaccine, all the while lying about the jab's effectiveness and intimidating so-called truth tellers. His 54-page lawsuit claims the pharmaceutical giant ran afoul of the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act after making false, deceptive, and misleading acts and practices by making unsupported claims about its vaccine. Pfizer marketed its shots using misleading statistics, it alleges, seeking to intimidate and silence anyone who questioned that they were 95% effective. A press release from Paxton's office also complains that Pfizer embarked on a campaign to intimidate the public into getting the vaccine as a necessary measure to protect their loved ones. Paxton has long been a vocal critic of COVID-19 safety mandates. And I'm pretty sure he's an anti-vaxxer generally. Weird. Let's see here. The complaint asks for $10,000 in civil penalties for each of 5 alleged violations of the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act, along with additional awards of restitution. The total sum equals more than $10 million. The state also is demanding the court permanently block Pfizer from making the claims about their vaccine. Pfizer denied the allegations in a statement, saying the case had no merit. Pfizer is deeply committed to the well-being of the patients it serves and has no higher priority than the safety and effectiveness of its treatments and vaccines. It said, according to The Hill, the statement noted that the company's vaccine had been administered to more than 1.5 billion with a B people, with a favorable safety profile in all age groups that is helping to protect against hospitalization and death. The representations made by the company by its COVID-19 or about its COVID-19 vaccine have been accurate and science-based, Pfizer said. Of course, at the Newsom-DeSantis debates, DeSantis claimed that he was accused of following science on COVID-19, and he vehemently denied he followed the science, because that's supposed to be, a way to get elected. The lawsuit filed in a Texas state district court takes on a scolding tone at times, claiming that Pfizer was in the wrong for not solving the pandemic quickly enough. Okay. Health data at both federal and state level fails to shore up many of the lawsuit's claims. Infections and deaths from the virus fell substantially beginning in early 2022, around that time that an estimated 75% of the U.S. population had gotten at least one dose of the vaccine. By December, around 267,000 people were estimated to have died of the virus that year, as compared to more than 475,000 deaths in 2021 and 350,000 in 2020. The Texas Department of State Health Services has calculated that the COVID death rate for fully vaccinated Texans remains 12 times lower than that of the unvaccinated. Now, Paxton's suit is the culmination of an inquiry launched by the Attorney General in May, probing the claims of 3 major drug companies about their respective vaccines' efficacy. His office said in a statement at the time that it was committed to discovering the full scope of decision-making behind pandemic interventions forced on the public, suggesting that political pressure or the drive to make a quick buck off the pandemic may have been motivating factors. Well, he would know about that, wouldn't he? The investigation kicked off 10 days before the pandemic was officially declared over. Just over 2 weeks later, the Texas House of Representatives voted to impeach Paxton for abuse of office, resulting in his suspension while the proceedings played out. But in mid-September, he was easily acquitted after a 2-week trial and reinstated, having emerged from the controversy with few scratches to show for it. Phyllis and Matthew Daly of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Most U.S. cities would have to replace lead water pipes within 10 years under strict new rules proposed by the EPA as the Biden administration moves to reduce lead in drinking water and prevent public health crises like the ones in Flint, Michigan and Washington, D.C. Millions of people consume drinking water from lead pipes, and the agency said tighter standards would improve IQ scores in children and reduce high blood pressure and heart disease in adults. It is the strongest overhaul of lead rules in more than 3 decades and will cost billions of dollars. Pulling it off will require overcoming enormous practical and financial obstacles. Well, let's get to work. These improvements ensure that in a not-too-distant future, there will never be another city and another child poisoned by their pipes, said Mona Hanna-Attisha, a pediatrician and clean water advocate who raised the early alarms about the crisis in Flint. The Biden administration has previously said that it wants all of the nation's roughly 9 million lead pipes to be removed, and rapidly. Lead pipes connect water mains in the streets to homes and are typically the biggest source of lead in drinking water. They are most common in older, industrial parts of the country. All right, let's get to work. And, this is a jobs program. Okay? Not just spending money, we're making money. That should appease some, though I doubt that since it's named Biden, it'll get mentioned at all. So, anyway, it's good news nonetheless. So let us, with that good news, go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, A Song of Snow. The Hunger Games is back, but those expecting the same level of excitement as the previous movies may be left wanting. Directed by Francis Lawrence, who helmed the other films and set 64 years prior to the events of the first installment, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is a prequel which tells the origin story of the notorious President Cornelius Snow, the villain we all came to know and hate in the original trilogy. In this one, we see the events that turned him from an ambitious but empathetic teen into a sadistic autocrat. Played by relative newcomer Tom Blythe, Snow is tasked with mentoring District 12 tribute Lucy Gray Baird, played by Rachel Zegler, as she and others prepare for the 10th annual Hunger Games. While mentoring Lucy Gray appears to be a hopeless task, and certainly not one he chooses, Snow quickly realizes that he has little choice, especially since he's attempting to restore his family's former good name. There's an entire subplot devoted to what caused the Snow family's fall from grace, but sadly, the film spends too little time with it. While Blythe and Zegler are fine in their respective lead roles, it's the supporting actors who really make this movie interesting, including Viola Davis as vicious head game master Dr. Gall, and the always great Peter Dinklage as Snow's often inebriated professor Dean Highbottom. Indeed, the Highbottom character is interesting enough that it could sustain its own spin-off. However, despite strong performances, dazzling production design, and its gritty political undercurrent, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes seems a tad lackluster compared to the buzzworthy previous outings. But for fans of the novels and the film franchise, this one, overall, is a respectable offering. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma wants to go back to the good old days when men were men. I'm Bill Newman. This is the Civil Liberties Minute, and that was the beginning of a recent editor's letter in The Week magazine, which continued after When Men Were Men, quote, and members of Congress routinely pummeled each other into bloody oblivion. What prompted this comment was, of course, the recent hearing where Senator Mullen, who, having taken umbrage at a social media post by the witness, Teamsters President Sean O'Brien, challenged the witness during his testimony to a fist fight, yelling at him to, quote, stand your butt up. The committee chair, Senator Bernie Sanders, gavelled the would-be pugilists into submission by insisting to Senator Mullen that he was, after all, and we quote, a senator. After the brouhaha, Senator Mullen refused to apologize and noted to Fox News that duels and brawls among federal elected officials were not uncommon in Washington in the 1800s and suggested that fistfights today might help restore respect for Congress. The senator's post-hearing remarks did not mention that the United States Senate, not so long ago, was often referred to as the world's greatest deliberative body. The Senate as the world's greatest deliberative body. Now, that, may we suggest, would be the good old days. And we can all hope that those good old days are not gone forever. This Uncivil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1966. That was the day that the registered nurses of the Youngstown General Duty Nurses Association walked out of their jobs. Nursing could be a grueling profession, with long hours of physical labor for low pay. In Youngstown, the nurses were frustrated because there were inconsistencies in pay. Some recently hired nurses made more than those who had been working for years. Part-time nurses did not receive the same wage increases as full-time employees. They also did not feel that they had enough say in delivering quality care for their patients. When they asked to meet with the hospital's executive director to discuss their concerns, the nurses were rebuffed. They then contacted the Ohio Nurses Association Union and asked for help. Youngstown was a steel town, a union town, and the nurses were ready to join in the local labor movement. At first, the Youngstown Hospital Association refused to bargain with the union. But when the nurses threatened to walk out, negotiations began. After 2 months of talking at the bargaining table, major issues remained unsettled, including pay and union recognition. Fed up, the nurses called for a mass resignation. 305 of the 433 nurses turned in their resignations. 2/3 of them were part-time nurses. They formed informational picket lines outside the hospitals. A federal mediator was brought in to settle the dispute. In the end, the nurses won significant gains. They received a more than 25% raise over 2 years. A grievance procedure was established for the first time, but most importantly, the union gained recognition and the right to bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions for the nurses and their patients. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all nighthawks in the diner of life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only around 46, so considerably cooler than what it's been. Well, it was pretty cold yesterday. We have a steady rain this morning, which has actually turned into showers, which will continue through the afternoon. Winds will be light and variable, and we're expecting about 1/4 of an inch during our daylight hours. And then tonight, we're looking for cloudy with occasional light rain throughout the night. And winds will be light and variable, and the lows will be near 40. And looking at something a little less than 1/4 inch overnight. But periods of rain tomorrow, Saturday, highs around 50, winds out of the south at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Rainfall nearly 1/2 inch. And the same on Sunday as well. We're looking at 2 consecutive days of at least 1/2 inch of rain. And then rain throughout the week, next week. So that's what we're looking forward to. Let's just hope it doesn't melt the snowpack. But it looks like the snow level is down to 3,200 feet, so it is coming down. Looks like pollen is rated as none here in our little village of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 29 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is still low at level 1. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.03 inches. Visibility is at 5 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is a chilly 38 degrees and clear. Paris is even chillier at 36 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 65 and clear, and they continue to have disruptions due to heavy wind. That's been going on for over a week. Bagram is 41 and clear. Kyiv is 31 and cloudy. Hong Kong is 66 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 44 and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 62 degrees and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 55 and partly cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 44 degrees with rain. And New York, New York is 46 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. The world wants more nuclear energy as a means to fight climate change and supply an ever-growing demand for electricity, part of a generational shift on thinking on atomic power. The head of the UN nuclear watchdog said yesterday, Thursday. Rafael Mariano Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, made the comments in an interview with the Associated Press at the COP28 climate talks. He called the inclusion of nuke power at the summit, where he said a major nuclear agreement was likely, showed just how far the formerly taboo subject had come, decades after the disasters at 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. However, he acknowledged the challenge still posed for his agency in monitoring nuclear programs in countries, particularly in Iran, after the collapse of its 2015 nuclear deal with the world powers. And why did that happen? Grossi said more countries getting nuclear weapons could create a domino effect, so it's very complicated and potentially a dangerous trend, he said. Grossi, who had just arrived in Dubai from Paris, said he spoke with French President Emmanuel Macron about the likely nuclear announcement that will include a public commitment in favor of nuke energy, which in a way that we have never seen before. He said such an arrangement, with the backing of world powers, could see nuclear energy become attainable by more nations. Now, the reporter reports that nuclear power does not produce greenhouse gas emissions. A plus, as the world works to reduce emissions, still, nuclear is sharply opposed by many environmentalists because of its waste. You know, something that takes just a few 10 million years to degrade. Silly extremists.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Konstantin Testaridis and Derek Gatopoulos of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov faced Western critics while attending international security talks yesterday, Thursday, in northern Macedonia, where he blamed NATO's reckless expansion to the east for war returning to Europe. The diplomats of several OSCE member nations, including Ukraine, boycotted the event due to Lavrov's planned attendance amid Russia's war in Ukraine. Lavrov spoke for about 15 minutes before walking out. He blamed what he described as Western tolerance of the ruling neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv. You know, the neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv run by a Jewish guy. And that is the reason that the war started with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Oh, is that why? Blame it on them. Putin has repeatedly alleged the Ukraine government is made up of neo-Nazis, even though the country has a democratically elected Jewish president who lost relatives in the Holocaust. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.